him, for I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Well, I don't know. Maybe you've read this passage or heard this passage at some point in your life, and it's a little bit disturbing. You know, there are those who are skeptical about the Bible and about faith, and this is one of the passages that they point to. You know, they say that Abraham was a delusional schizophrenic, hearing voices. And not only that, he was a complete psychopath, ready to murder his son. But we read this, and we realize that Abraham was not delusional. He was not a schizophrenic. He was not a psychopath. He was a man who trusted God with everything. And he was not reluctant to follow him. Reluctance to commit robs many Christians of effective ministry. We hold back. We're afraid to commit. We're afraid to step out. And it robs us of the ministries that God is calling each and every one of us to. It weakens the testimony He has given each and every one of us. Most Christians hold back from full commitment because we're afraid of the cost. And there is a cost. I mean, it's pretty easy here in the good old US of A to be a Christian. We're not generally going to be physically assaulted for our faith like some people get in other countries. People may talk about us. We might find ourselves on the outs socially because, you know, people think we're some kind of religious nut. Or it may even cost us something economically. We might not get that promotion at work, but as a general rule, it's fairly easy to be a Christian, and yet we still hold back. See, we want to hold on to some measure of security in our life. We want to make sure we don't lose that job. We want to keep that relationship that makes us feel good. And we like God and we love Christ, but yet we're reluctant when we look at the cost. We're afraid to step forward. Are you willing to be like Abraham today and follow God so wholeheartedly that it just might cost you everything, even that which is most dear to you? That's our lesson here today. Not holding back. If we want to be the people God has called us to be, we can't hold back when God calls. In verse 9 it says right here, turn back here, when they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood, bound his son Isaac, laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Now, I'm going to go back a few verses here, and you can follow me back into verse 1 of this chapter. And Abraham got a very disturbing call from God. You ever got a disturbing call from somebody in the middle of that? He got a very disturbing call from God. In verse 1 in chapter 22, it says, it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, here I am. He said, take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son. He split wood for the burnt offering, rose, and went to the place of which God had told him. And on the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place in the distance. Old Abraham, the father of the faithful, the man who 3 of the major religions of the world consider their father and founder. The Hebrews, the Israelites, the Jewish people looked to Abraham as their physical and spiritual father. Christians look to Abraham as their spiritual father of the faith. And Muslims look to Abraham as a faithful father in their faith. He is a wonderful example, an inspirational person. But Abraham wasn't perfect. Read the whole story. We don't have time to go into it today, but just read the whole story of Abraham's life, and you'll find that at 75 years old, Abraham's sitting over there in the land that we would call Iraq today. Back then it was called Ur of the Chaldeans. And God called him to leave that place and move from there and come over to a place he would show you. Move away from your family. Move away from your father. Move away from your culture. Move away from your business. Move away from everything you've known all of your life for 75 years and go to a place I will show you. And so Abraham did. He came to Canaan, just like God told him. And then after he got there, he started messing up. If you know the story, you know a famine came pretty soon. And so Abraham just kept on moving right through that promised land, right on down to Egypt. Got down to Egypt and got in trouble down there because he let the Egyptians take his wife into Pharaoh's harem. And Pharaoh found out about this and kicked him out. Back to Canaan he went. Things happened bad again. And next thing you know, he went into one of the neighboring countries and did the same thing again. Let that king take his wife into the harem. And the next thing you know, that king found out. And he kicks him out. And so Abraham made some mistakes, time and again. But Abraham was a man who kept walking toward God. Even when he messed up. Even when he fell down. Even when he stepped off the path, he managed to get back on the path and keep pushing toward God. And here he gets to a point, and he's getting older, and he doesn't have any kids, and his wife's getting older. And finally God comes to him and says, you're going to have a son. You're going to have a child. And Abraham says, good, but the child's not coming. So his wife says, take my servant girl, have a child with her. So he does that. Another mistake. Now, we don't want to call Ishmael a mistake. I don't want to say that. I don't want you to hear that from me. I'm going to say that he was stepping outside of what God intended for him. And eventually, that came into some tension there in the house. After the promised child, Isaac, finally comes along miraculously to a nearly 100-year-old Abraham and his 90-year-old wife, Ishmael has to go away. This house ain't big enough for the both of us, so to speak. A lot of tension. And so now everything is finally calmed down. The family is the way God had always intended. Abraham's life is settled. He's in the promised land. He has the promised child. And God comes to him and says, now take that boy and kill him in my name. Shed his blood out as a blood sacrifice to me. That's a disturbing call, isn't it? Abram had already given up a son to God's command. Did you ever think about that in this thing? God had commanded Abraham that you need to sacrifice your son Isaac. If you go back in chapter 21, in verse 9, it says, Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, mocking. Therefore she said to Abraham, drive out this maid and her son. The son of this maid will not be an heir with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because of his son. We're talking about Ishmael here, his son with Sarah's maid, Sarah's servant. And Abraham loved Ishmael. That was his son. And now there's tension. At this point, Ishmael's an early teenager. God said to Abraham, do not be distressed because of the lad and your maid. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her. For through Isaac your descendants will be named. The son of the maid I will make a nation also, because he is your descendant. So Abraham rose early in the morning, took bread and skin of water, gave them to Hagar, put them on her shoulder, gave her the boy, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. See, Isaac is not the first son that Abraham has sacrificed to God's command. He sacrificed. He didn't physically sacrifice Ishmael, but God said, you're going to have to cut them loose so that I can do the work I've intended to do in you. And so Abraham had made a heart-wrenching decision. He loved Ishmael. Said he was greatly disturbed because of the matter, but God said, Abraham, I'll take care of the boy. I'm going to make him a great nation too. You go ahead and do what I've commanded you to do. Kind of a little bit of foreshadowing. And now God comes to Abraham and says, now I'm going to up the ante on you. I just told you to abandon Ishmael, but you didn't physically harm him. Now I'm going to tell you to kill this boy. Let's see if you'll go that far. That's a test, isn't it? That's a test. See, God sometimes calls us into uncomfortable sacrifices for his sake. God will do that, y'all. It's not always easy. You know, in Matthew chapter 8, there's a part where people are liking what Jesus is saying, and they want to follow him. They want to come along. And a scribe came to him and said to him, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests. The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Are you willing to sacrifice your physical comfort, your economic security to follow me? Another of the disciples said to him, "Lord, permit me first to go and bury my father." Jesus said to him, "Follow me and allow the dead to bury their own dead." And don't read that thinking that his father was laying dead at the funeral home at the time, okay? And they're fixing to... His father was probably still living. And under the way the society worked at that time, he was saying, I need to go home and be faithful to my family and faithful to my father and treat him as my authority and live under his authority like a good son's supposed to. And Jesus says to him, basically, are you willing to sacrifice every earthly relationship to follow me? Okay. God calls us into uncomfortable sacrifices, y'all. It might be every earthly relationship. It might be economic sacrifice. Hey, you know what? There may be somebody sitting out here, some of our young people, that one day God is going to call you to a far and foreign land to go into an uncomfortable place and share the gospel with people who need to hear it. And it's going to be uncomfortable because you have to leave everything you know. And you may have friends and family that will try to talk you out of it, saying you can reach people for Jesus right here. But when God calls, no matter what he calls to, we're supposed to go and not hold back. Because that's where we see God at work. That's where we see God at work. So don't hold back. Don't hold back when God calls. Don't hold back even when God calls and we wind up in threatening circumstances. Let's look at verse 10 here for just a minute. In verse 10 it says, Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Now I'm going to stop talking about Abraham for just a minute. I want to talk about Isaac for a minute. Because a lot of times in this story we focus on Abraham, and everybody talks about Abraham, and nobody talks about Isaac. You know, in the story, the only word we hear from Isaac is talks about, Abraham gathers up all the stuff, and they go on the trip, and they're going, and at some point Isaac says, hey, Dad, we've got the wood, and you've got the coals for the fire, and where's the sacrifice? That's all you hear from Isaac. Where's the lamb? Where's the goat? And Abraham says, the Lord's going to provide that sacrifice. Isaac's participation in this event is often overlooked. Now, there's a little bit of debate as to how old Isaac was when this happened. Now, follow me here for just a minute. When you heard this passage, if you heard this when you were in Sunday school or Vacation Bible School or one of these schools, when you were young and you were a kid, and you took some of those flannel graph pictures, do you remember those? Anybody here old enough to remember those, with the little thing, and you put them up on the wall and they had the pictures? Didn't it always show old Abraham and little boy Isaac? Well, I'm here to tell you, I don't think that was the case. We don't know how old Isaac was at this point. But what we do know is he was old enough, big enough, and strong enough that when they got close to the Mount of Moriah, God put the firewood on Isaac to carry up the mountain. That's not a little boy, y'all. We also know that the very next thing in Scripture in chapter 23 is when Sarah, Isaac's mother, dies. And Abraham begins to send out to find a bride for Isaac. And we know that Isaac was 37 years old when his mother died. So we don't know that, there could have been a passage of time in here. Isaac's probably anywhere from being an older teenage age to in his 30s when this happens. I point this out to say Abraham at this point is probably 115 or 120 years old, and he's going to sacrifice a young, strong man who could easily overpower him and run down that hill. Here's Isaac, young and strong. And here's his dad beginning to tie him up as a human sacrifice. And nowhere in there do we get the notion that Isaac resisted any of this. Don't ever forget his participation in this, that he was willing to go along with what was happening. And so when I say don't hold back when God calls, even under threatening circumstances, Isaac is the one under the threatening circumstances here. And Isaac is showing great faith too. Isaac's surrender, his wholehearted surrender to what his father was asking him to do, is a picture of Christ's sacrificial surrender to the Father's ultimate will. When you look at this sacrifice, young, strong, able Isaac willingly laying down his life so his father Abraham can offer him as a sacrifice, it is a picture of Christ later on, willingly laying down his life to the will of his Father. In John chapter 19, as Jesus stood before Pilate, Pilate said to him, "You do not speak to me? Do you not know I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin." As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, "If you release this man, you're no friend of Caesar. Anyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar." Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out, sat down at the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Jesus made no move to try to escape. In fact, that night in the Garden of Gethsemane, when the officials came to arrest him, Peter whips out a sword and he's ready to go fight and defend Jesus. And Jesus said, "Put it away. This is how it's supposed to be." He had prayed, "If it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." And so when you look at this picture of Isaac being willing to be sacrificed, just because God has called us into this situation, you let it point your mind to Jesus being willing to lay down his life, and ultimately, unlike Isaac, who would be spared by God, Jesus would be sacrificed by the Father. And because of that, you and I can have eternal life. You and I can have salvation and redemption with God. And we can go out and tell people about a good and loving God. That's why I say, even if the sacrifices are or the circumstances are threatening, don't hold back. Jesus has gone the ultimate mile, and now it's up to us to tell that story. And that's what we're being called to do. Faithfulness can bring about, if you're faithful to the gospel and you're faithful to Christ, it can bring about fervent opposition. There will be people who do not want to hear. There will be people who try to slander your name. There will be people who try to get you fired. There will be people who might want to get you run out of the HOA if you try to fly your Christian flag on your house. All right? But they will also reveal great blessings. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus said this in the Beatitudes. These are part of where you're blessed now. "Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." You hear what Jesus said there? Don't run from the threatening circumstances. He says, when these things happen to you, you are what? What? Nobody knows it. Blessed. Somebody finally said it. You are blessed. Now, that just doesn't sound right, does it? When bad things happen, you're blessed, except in God's economy, maybe those aren't bad things. Because they reveal to us the depth of God's true love and faithfulness. And we learn that. And we pass the test. Okay? And they also reveal that to the world around us. The ones who are persecuting us. The ones who are coming against us. The ones who need to hear the gospel and the love of Christ just as much as we need to hear about it. Faithfulness can bring about that opposition, but it also reveals great blessings. So when we get down to this, we're called. Don't hold back when God calls. Don't hold back, even if it's scary looking, okay? And don't hold back, because you can be assured of God's faithfulness no matter what's going on. In verse 11, it says, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not stretch out your hand against the lad, and do nothing to him, for now I know you fear God, since you've not withheld your son, your only son, from me. God intervened and revealed to Abraham that this was a test. Back in verse 1, we read it. It said, God tested Abraham. God tested Abraham. What is a test? Like I told the kids here. Why do your teachers give you tests in school? Because they want to see you fail? No. Teachers give tests for two reasons. One, they want you to know where you need to improve. They want you to know what the weak points are in your learning, your education, or whatever it is. And also it helps them to know, okay, what do I need to work on this student? And God tests us in exactly the same ways. When tests come, we pass or we fail, we know this is a strong point in my faith. I can trust God. Or when we fail, we're like, God, we need to work on this some more. And God shows this to us. I like to say sometimes, look, you know, the carpenter doesn't know how good his roof is until it's been through a storm or two, right? And remains dry. Shipbuilder doesn't know how seaworthy his vessel is until it's ridden out a storm or two at sea. Storms are necessary, but they also show us how faithful God is. Isaac was God's promise for Abraham's future. See, when Abraham took Isaac and laid him on that altar, he wasn't just making a blood sacrifice to appease a God. He wasn't just going to kill his son whom he loved. He was also sacrificing his future. In verse 21, or chapter 21 rather, in verse 12, it says right there, God said to Abraham, do not be distressed because of the lad you're made. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her, for through Isaac your descendants will be named. God had told Abraham, I'm going to make you a great nation. This is in a time before you had any children. Nations are going to come from you. I'm promising you that. You're going to see it. And then Abraham stepped out, had a child with the servant girl, Ishmael, and God said, no, I wasn't going to do it through them. You're getting ahead of me. I'm going to work a miracle where people said it couldn't be done. And so eventually, Sarah has that child, Isaac. He's the promised child. Isaac's going to be the one. The nation's going to come from them. All the nations are going to be blessed in the world through Isaac. And then what's God tell Abraham to do? Now go kill him. Why would Abraham do that? If Isaac's dead, where's the future coming from? Isaac is the guarantee of the future. Isaac's going to take care of me in my old age. Isaac's going to have descendants and make the family line go and bless the whole world. Well, in Hebrews chapter 11, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, in Isaac your descendants shall be called, what we just read. He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he also received him back as a type. Abraham had such faith in God, and had such faith in God's faithfulness and in God's promise, that God had promised him that Isaac was going to be the one through whom he was going to have descendants, through whom all the world was going to be blessed, through whom the process and the plan of God was going to be worked out. Abraham had such faith in the faithfulness of God to his promise that he was willing to lay Isaac on that altar and kill him, because he said, if God has promised this was going to happen through Isaac, this is going to happen through Isaac, even if God has to have raised him back up from the dead. Because God will not go back on his promise. And then the author of Hebrews points out to us, he says, figuratively speaking, he did get Isaac back from the dead. He was tied up, laid on the altar, everything's about to happen, and God stopped it. Okay? It was a picture of that. He was so convinced of God's faithfulness to His own promise, that He was willing to sacrifice His future and Isaac's future because He knew God would come through. See, God's promise is that He will be faithful to His children. God's promise is that He will be faithful to His children. Don't forget that. And that's why you can go wholehearted and not hold back. That's why Jesus says in Matthew 6:33, seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be added into you. And Paul would write to the Philippians church in Philippians 1:6, I am confident of this very thing, that He who began a good work in you will perfect it until the day of Christ Jesus. See, whatever God has intended to do, He's going to do. All right? You can trust Him. You can go all out, wholeheartedly. You don't have to hold back. You don't have to protect yourself. God has got it in His plan. You say, well, what if I lose my job? God's promised to feed you. Okay? What if somebody kills me? That's pretty bad. But for a Christian, that just moves us to a new address. And a much better one than the one we have here. Okay? God's promise is His faithfulness to His children. Many times when you read, I love how after Moses died, and Joshua takes over, read back through that story sometimes, and just look at how many times God tells Joshua, I will never leave or forsake you. Do not be afraid. I will not leave you. Do not be afraid. I will never leave you or forsake you. You, Joshua, go and do what I've called you to do. And that word comes down to us. I don't know what God is calling you to. I don't know where God would call you or what ministry or testimony He has in mind for your life. But I know this. If you will be faithful to Him and follow Him in it, He will support you, defend you, and keep you lifted up in it because He is faithful to His children. Okay? So don't hold back. The life that God is calling you to is right before you, ready for you to lay a hold of and pick up. You can't do that, though, if your hands are full of lesser things. We can't pick up and grab a hold of the life that God is calling us to if we're still trying to hold on to the life we have because we're afraid to let it go. Turn it loose. Let God have that and let Him have you. So what do you need to let go of in order to fully commit to God? What is holding you back from the life He is calling you to? That's going to look like something different for each and every one of us here. And that's a question that each one of us and God has to answer between ourselves and Him. But my word here today is whatever it is, let Him have you wholeheartedly. Because you will never be more blessed. You will never have more peace in your heart, no matter how rough and stormy the circumstances may get around you. I'm going to ask Jerry and our musicians to come back, and we're going to sing a hymn of invitation and response. It's going to be hymn number 482, Jesus is Calling. Now, if something in this message has touched your heart in a way that you would like to respond in a public fashion, that's what this time is open for here at the end of our services. And it might be that's not this message that's done it, okay? Could have been the Sunday school hour that you were in earlier today. It could have been sometime earlier this week as you're going around, maybe a word you heard on the radio, something that came across the television, a card or a letter you received from a friend, a conversation with a Christian brother or sister somewhere that sparked something in your heart. Whatever it is, it's the Holy Spirit trying to move you closer to God, and move you closer to Him. Maybe for the first time in your life, to lay your life completely aside and surrender your life to Him. We invite you to come forward if that's the case today and share that with us because we're going to celebrate with you, okay? And maybe you've done that, but you say, I haven't walked as like I should. I have been holding back some things. You know what? God is working on us all. None of us are a finished product. And so you can rededicate your life to God today publicly if you would like to. Maybe you'd just like us to pray for you for something today. We'd be honored to do that. If you would just come share your burden, we'll pray over you. If you don't want to share it yet, maybe it's something you want to keep private, you can come to the side benches and pray there. We won't pry. We'll let you share that when you're ready. We'll keep you lifted up in prayer while you're there, okay? Let's all stand.